Hi, we had to do a TOK assignment that consisted on creating a survey for 11th graders. The point on conducting the survey was to analyze human behavior while looking at problems with human sciences. One way to find out what people think is, of course, to ask them. Since most people are somewhat honest, we can learn from questionnaires, opinion polls, and interviews. At the same time, since people generally want to see themselves in a good light, you cannot always take what they say at face value. There is evidence from psychology to suggest that we tend to overestimate our strengths and underestimate our weaknesses. This is clearly portrayed on the survey we did to the 11th graders. As seen, they are highly confident, maybe too confident since they underestimate their weakness. But language is in charge of doing this. So by phrasing the question in a certain way, we could trick the 11th graders into answering the way we wanted. In fact, we manipulated language so that they would not know that they were underestimating their weakness. The results of the 11th grade survey is as following. The first question is, have you been untruthful? 64% of the 11th graders said yes, and 36% said no. Question 2 was, do you think America should help and send us US forces to Syria considering that an estimated 70,000 people have been killed and 300,000 people have been wounded and desperately require medical care, but more than half of all serious hospitals have been damaged and a third no longer function? 35% here agreed and 65% disagreed. Question 3 said, I would occasionally describe my school experience as somewhat dull. Dull is lacking interest or excitement. Here, 92% said yes and 8% said no. The next question is, you are an above average student. So here, 77% considered them as an average student and 23% did not. The next question is, I have a tendency to insult others. 50% here said yes and the other 50 said no. So question 5 is, global warming is not real. It is created by the media, another good example of a narrative fallacy. Here, 18% agreed and 82% disagreed. And question 5 is, if you get lower than a 4 out of 7 on a test and you studied, it usually is because the teacher is a hard grader. In this question, there was a 50-50 chance because 50% of the 11th graders said yes and 50% of the 11th graders said no. In question 6, it said, if I saw 50 soles lying in front of the office, I would grab them and return it to the office hoping to find the owner. 70% here agreed and 30% disagreed. Next, taking into account that the Middle East is split down religious and ethnic lines over the removal of Assad and intervening in a civil war is likely to rouse hatred and terrorist aggression against us from whichever faction we choose sides against. Do you think the USA should join the war in Syria, potentially expanding the violence to Saudi Arabia? Here, 30% said yes and 70% said no. So, after regarding the results, I was able to extract this knowledge issue being, why is language so easily manipulated? According to dictionary.com, language is a body of words and a system for their use, common to people who are of the same community or nation, live in the same geographical area, or the same cultural tradition. Having this in mind, one can come up with the following implications, which state that we can observe human behavior, but not people's minds. However, we can make educated guesses. People overestimate strengths and underestimate weaknesses. People are self-conscious and do not admit to unpopular opinions. Loaded questions contain hidden assumptions that make our answers biased, influenced by external factors. Controversial topics, especially, can be swayed by the use of emotional language. Also, there's a difference between what people would do hypothetically and what they actually would do. Moreover, language is selected as a way of knowing, given that it possesses a huge power when it is linked to human behavior and how people may react or respond to certain situations. Language can also convey ideas and change people's beliefs. As seen in the results, the 11th graders find themselves in a continuous negotiation with language, a continuous back and forth towards construing meaning. So even if we think we have the power to master language, in reality, language is the one mastering us. Better said, and taking one step further, language makes us, for we cannot perceive and decode anything that stands outside language. In brief, we can conclude that language is a very useful way of knowing. However, it is not always reliable because wording a question in a particular way may manipulate the audience, tricking them into answering something that they would not normally do.